worth your while. So give me your all. I'll take it to Mars. Oh, I'll stick like glue inside your mind. Just watch me break it. And I swear you're falling into me. Touch me. I swear you would do anything that I want. So keep us awake till the dawn. Baby, feel free. I wanna make you sweat on me. I wanna make you sweat on me.
Good morning and good afternoon. Thank you for joining us in what is our third year of Grow with Inbound. Some of you may know that our first two events were actually live in central London, but obviously due to the circumstances we've all been enduring over the past months, we're obviously fully virtual, which is good because we're actually also fully international now. As part of Huble Digital. So we started the day in Singapore with some friends from our SingSpot office, just as they were finishing their day. Now we're in Europe and obviously our South African office, but at the end of the day, we want to move to the US and some guest speakers from the US as well. So a truly international event. We're obviously very proud and excited to be running it across 4 different continents. So very happy with that. Today, we're going to talk about inbound PR, but you are part of a wider community today of around over 500 marketers, salespeople, customer service people that have joined us for Grow with Inbound 2020. So a massive thank you to everyone who's taken part and taken the time out to join us at different sessions over the course of the day. We'll go into a little bit of introductions as to who we are and who I am speaking at you and who my colleague is as well. So I think without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and run through a few. Don't worry, it won't be death by PowerPoint. What we're going to help illustrate some of the points that we want to try and make around by the time now. Is an opportunity essentially to make some of it. So start by doing is I'll just introduce my colleague John. John, do you want to say hi?
Hi, happy to be here. Well, great to have a lovely audience. I'm John, as it says, Senior Account Manager here for the PR side at Huble Digital. Been working in B2B tech PR for roughly about 6 years now, working with Dave and his team here on many kind of campaigns and programs for our clients. And I think today, excited to talk to you about inbound PR, how can it help you adapt to your COVID or pre and post COVID comm strategy, hopefully.
Thank you, John. So I guess, yeah, what qualifies us to be talking about this and about inbound PR? So John's got a wealth of experience about dealing with the media, and I've worked in B2B technology PR for near as makes no difference a decade. So we are drawing on some experience about how we've seen things change, especially in digital PR over that time. So I hope you find some of it interesting. I saw this illustration and it really kind of struck me because there's no escaping COVID-19 as we all experienced. And whether you're at home or at work or one of the lucky ones who can go to the pub and enjoy a pint, COVID has changed the world for, at the very least, I would say, and this is my own personal opinion, the next 3 to 5 years before we can get back to any kind of normal way of working. And I think if we're looking at, what we were doing pre-March 2020, February, March, you can't go back to that now. Everyone's talking about the new normal, and that's just doesn't exist really. You need to change the way and adapt what you're doing. And what we've seen is obviously businesses are having a tough time. People have started to look at their budgets and have had to make necessary changes. And, first in the firing line is usually PR, closely followed by marketing. But that's because PR has always been very difficult to measure and show impact. Now, that has changed in the last 10 years massively, and more so, I would say, in the last 3 years with the way analytics has improved. And this is what we'll talk a little bit more about today as to how you can set up your website and your PR campaigns in order to accurately measure impact. But it's time to try and adapt and change what it is we're doing. But how? John, do you want to explain a little bit about inbound PR and how we came across it?
Yeah, sure. So I think inbound PR as a kind of term kind of came up with from Ileana Sariva, one of the ex-HubSpot colleagues, who wrote a book called Inbound PR. You see at the bottom there, a very, very, I think, on point quote there as well from her. But yeah, it's been a couple of years since we found out about inbound PR, and obviously it, well, we became fully ingrained in that kind of methodology, having read the book and found it kind of struck a chord with us as a business, because we are so kind of data driven in the way we kind of run our campaigns and our measurement. So it shone a kind of spotlight on the importance of not just measurement, but accurate measurement as well. Using inbound marketing as one of those kind of shining examples of that, because PR has, as Dave said, traditionally had a really tough time doing this. One of the kind of common myths that we kind of encounter in our kind of day-to-day is that PR measurement revolves around stuff like reach or circulation, or audience numbers, or something called advertising value equivalency, which is literally just measuring the amount of space on a magazine and seeing how much it would cost you in terms of placing that in a kind of advertisement. So sorry if anyone's still doing that and that rings a bell with you. You're unfortunately still stuck in the 1990s. So we're going to tell you today how you can finally go digital. But the media landscape in itself has kind of inevitably shifted towards becoming digital, and the PR industry with that has obviously been forced to kind of change with it. If not, it gets completely left behind. So I think, especially now with all the kind of tools and digital tools you can use, marketers, have moved so far away from what we would call vanity metrics, those kind of reach, circulation, or advertising equivalency. They no longer care, or have ever cared, arguably, if featuring Farmers Guardian, if their key audience is kind of tech CEOs or CIOs, and they certainly don't care about the quantity of media coverage as well, if the quality isn't there. So the answer to this conundrum is what we believe inbound PR. But as a question we often get asked is what the hell is that, and what does it involve?
Which is a very valid question. Now, these the PESO model is essentially what it's founded on, and it shouldn't come as anything new to a lot of you. But what inbound PR does is it takes these four well-established methods of communication, and it kind of encapsulates all of them, and a nice little graphic here, and wraps those whole practices within inbound PR, and starts to get you to think a little bit differently about how you can use each of the channels. And most people think PR is just about pitching to journalists and earning media coverage. Yes, that's one element of PR. But more and more, what we are seeing is that bleeds into other aspects which traditionally were classed as marketing, whereas now what we're seeing is that's not the case. Inbound PR should be seen as a complementary discipline to marketing and inbound marketing, and shouldn't be seen as two separate disciplines. It's a mixture of content, media relations, good SEO, a little bit of paid media. And what inbound does is it properly measures all those different aspects so that we can determine ROI. But change is never easy, but as it says here, we shouldn't shy away from it. So what I want to show today is really about how some things have been successful over the last 6 months, and how some things have perhaps failed as well. But if you have to change. And if you think about companies, John and I were speaking the other day in the preparation for this, and we were talking about BlackBerry and the shift that has seen. I used to love my BlackBerry one, but they refused to adapt, and they were slow to change who didn't see or didn't assess the market properly, and ultimately they've been left behind. And I think that's really apparent about what we've been going through over the last 6 months, is that there's been a huge change, and we need to adapt, really.
Yeah, for sure. I think obviously there's been a huge disruption, not just to business, but to everyone. Obviously working from home now is a very new thing for, I think, quite a lot of people. But yeah, again, as you were mentioning earlier, obviously marketing budgets were kind of either slashed or just put on hold. So while kind of sales inbound as well, queries obviously declined very sharply. But yeah, PR was one of those areas that obviously was affected as well. A lot of kind of PR budgets at the height of the pandemic were slashed, and ultimately businesses found themselves having to do a lot more with a lot less kind of budgets and resources. People leaving on furlough, and unfortunately some redundancies as well. So in terms of what business should be doing, I think maybe it's important for us to maybe guide you guys through what we think would be the best way to do that.
Yeah, and I think, these are just 4 points. Obviously, there's a lot you can do, but I think, looking back at what you've probably done already, it's safe to say the majority of you have probably issued some kind of communications out to your customer base and your partners and suppliers to reassure them in the early days of COVID hitting, to let them know you're here, you're not going anywhere, and let them know what you're doing to provide that reassurance. But PR, and this is often what people forget, is a two-way communication. So you have to listen to what your customers and your partners and your suppliers are telling you as well. And listening now is more crucial than ever in order for you to adapt properly and change what it is that you want to do. And using the different channels, such as your social media channels, are a great way to try and tap into some of that feeling of unrest that people might have, or whether there's something that's within the industry that you operate in that you weren't aware until now. Opening your lines of communication, whether that be on your blog or your social media channels, to receive that feedback, which then feeds into your post-COVID communications and business strategy, is absolutely vital at the moment. So what you need to do is really try and figure out what is important to you post-COVID, or as we enter this kind of next stage, really, of COVID. Your priorities obviously have not changed that too much, because new business is obviously still a main focus for everyone, and generating new business in order to survive and grow and prosper. But what you were doing previously has to change, and your messages of what you were doing previously has to change. And you can use the feedback that you're getting from your prospects, from your customers, to change your messaging. And what we're going to talk about and what illustrates to you is how you can change that messaging with some successes of people who have accurately changed that into a proper way, and how ultimately measuring what it is that you've done will also have to change and adapt over the course of the next few months. So, why is that? And, why do you have to change? Well, simply it's the FUD, what we call the FUD factor: fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And that has been rife over the last few months, as we all try and get to grips. Now, there are some great examples, and one of the best ways of, in a B2B world, of showing some kind of a flexibility or adaptability is usually around pricing and costs. So offering discounts. You can't go to any of your favorite retailers at the moment without being bombarded with sales, discount sales, which is fantastic for us as consumers, and understandable for them as businesses, because they've got a lot of spring and summer stock which they need to shift as they try and encourage people back into bricks and mortar shops, or at least back to shopping online more and more as well. But in the world of B2B, some of the things that we've witnessed are shifts in how deferral of payments or flexibility in terms of how to help businesses survive. And I think there's a real opportunity here that if you're in a position where you can help your customers and suppliers through this time, what you do is you engender long-term loyalty in order to do that. So I think being flexible and adaptable, and we've experienced it ourselves with HubSpot, those guys are very flexible and they help us a lot. So I think, you know, generating that kind of goodwill at this time is vitally important. And there's been a few other successes. John, there's a few on here that we like, but I'll let you run through them.
Yeah, a few we picked out here that we've seen over the past, I think, 6 months since obviously kind of COVID hit. As Dave's saying, it is about flexibility, but I think one of the key aspects now is about empathy. You know, we have been guilty of telling our clients in the past, you need to, you know, shout above the crowd, but obviously you guys will probably know, as people keep shouting at you, you're not going to listen. I think it is all about listening now, listening to your customers, listening to people, and finding the right channels to do that. So I love this campaign from Dove on the left-hand side here, which was just basically showing support for the kind of frontline health workers, the NHS, and the impact of wearing PPE all day while kind of battling COVID. So the message, I think, sits quite nicely with the Dove brand, but it isn't directly selling a kind of product. It's just showing empathy and the footage from the video, so you can find it on YouTube, that many of us would probably not have seen otherwise. So great tie into a really, really good campaign alongside their kind of and product in an indirect way. We also saw a kind of more helpfulness side from people like Deliveroo. So I don't know about you guys, but I've been ordering a lot of Deliveroo since lockdown. I think these guys took that to another level to kind of help deliver free meals to NHS workers during that kind of pandemic. And again, it's just a small sign or token of goodwill, and thanks for the recognition for those kind of workers in those tough conditions again. So something a little more kind of tangible than an organised kind of round of applause, for example. That was really nice. And then again, on the right hand side is something a bit more kind of controversial, a bit more humorous, like the NHS campaign did. You see the top right and the kind of social distancing kind of play on words they did at the bottom as well. We really like this as a kind of tongue-in-cheek kind of example of what you could do in a kind of campaign. So slightly contentious again, and I hope it isn't causing offence, but this is, we think, a kind of clever and thoughtful image that kind of portrays the importance of social distancing in quite a funny way.
With every success, there's always failures as well, and there's a few on here which are, you know, struck a chord with us. We're big football fans, and so when we saw that Liverpool were announcing to furlough some of their non-playing staff, being one of the most successful and wealthiest clubs in the world, who position themselves as the people's club, we were quite surprised at this decision, and it made me wonder that decision, had that decision been made without a senior communications person in the room, because I find it hard to believe that, you know, any communications person at a senior level would have signed that off as a good idea. Maybe they raised their concerns and got overruled. Thankfully, they did a U-turn and came out of it relatively unscathed, but it could have been avoided altogether if they just had a little bit of thought and a little bit of empathy and not misread the nation's mood. Similarly with Richard Branson, who has a very personal brand with Virgin. I think he totally misread the mood of the nation when he asked the government for a bailout, which has impacted on his personal brand and obviously the business's brand. And then finally, TfL London, they initially announced that they're obviously going to increase their annual fares. And if anyone's commuted into London or any cities, you know how expensive this can be. But again, they've stepped back a little bit because they've now offered some flexible season tickets. But for me, it was a case of, you know, not plowing ahead, thinking that you could do what you were doing previously without making any changes was foolish. And I think that's an example of what TfL did. And they backtracked slightly, but the damage is already done. Mm-hmm. So how do you go from managing the PR from your business, with your business, to avoid similar faux pas, basically? Well, social is a good way. And John, talk us through how we can use our social channels.
Yeah, again, one of the obviously kind of key or core aspects of the kind of Peso model. So social Again, as I said earlier, you can't just be seen now to just be shouting out all about yourself. But depending on obviously what kind of social platform is of your weapon of choice, for example, if you're more kind of B2C focused, you might focus on stuff like Instagram or TikTok now is a big one, or Snapchat, whatever. Or kind of B2B focused, you're maybe thinking more about Twitter or LinkedIn. Any kind of social platform, once identified, is kind of perfect for displaying that kind of empathy, and also reaching out to those kind of customers and partners, suppliers, and even the media, to update them of any kind of news or business developments that you might have, like the campaigns we've just seen. But it's also, again, as we were saying earlier, about two-way communication. So again, not just playing out your own kind of messages, but also listening to people, really kind of researching on seeing what they're kind of saying as well, and kind of being part of that conversation. But whoever is kind of running your social media campaigns obviously needs to have that kind of empathy to how people are feeling. So constantly, again, pushing your kind of promotional material is not going to be appropriate if it ever has been, especially now though. So I think in this regard, you kind of need to be more informative, more understanding, more empathetic, and possibly adding a bit of humour in there again, just to be careful as well, just with that humour. As we've seen, people can be easily offended on a social media, I'm sure, as everyone's seen. But again, more empathetic. So really, really listening and caring about your kind of key audience on that platform.
And obviously, in any PR campaign, there's usually thought leadership, which is your earned channels, essentially. Now, I think this is where you have to constantly review and adapt the content that you're creating to show that empathy. But it's not just a case of kind of sitting there and saying, "Oh, it's really terrible, isn't it? We're all in it together." We're way past that now. I think what we should be doing is offering strategic advice about how we've dealt with the past few months and how we're going forward. So I think what we need to do is really kind of look back at what you've done, change it, and don't shy away from the successes that you've had. I think sharing some of your successes helps to, people are worried about that because they might think it's making our competitors strong, giving away some of the family jewels or the company secrets. Well, it's funny because we don't see it like that. Our chief strategy officer, Darren Smith, he was obsessed with beating his competition until he read Infinite Games by Simon Sinek. And he came to the realization then that if we beat all of the competition, become the winners, then the game is over. Our business shuts down and we have to start a new competition. So it's much better to play the long game, share the knowledge of what it is that you're doing, and try and understand the fact that your competitors and your rivals push you to do better. So use what you've learned and share that within the market, because that will help to position you a little bit better.
Again, as we were saying, kind of flexibility in that, adapting very fast, like the BlackBerry example we gave earlier. Obviously, some of the kind of ideas or kind of campaigns that you can do right now is obviously involving kind of discounts and special offers. We've seen a lot of people offering free trials or free services in the meantime during kind of lockdown and COVID, as many businesses were kind of feeling the pinch, and obviously people working from home as well, having a tough time financially as well. But I think if a lot of people can see that as a brand, you're willing to help them out during a tough time, then they're going to end up feeling a lot greater loyalty towards that when it comes to the end. So I think it all comes back down to, again, listening to people, listening to your customers, your partners and your suppliers, and understanding their kind of business needs, whether you can help them and how you can help them. If you're in a position to, for example, provide discounts, and using kind of paid channels is a great way for doing that, kind of targeting specific prospects, again, in that kind of situation to generate new business for you, but also at the same time providing them with a great deal of useful information and helpfulness. I think a lot of people will appreciate that, especially now.
Yeah, and I think, most importantly of all, it's about being personal. We are social beings. People buy from people, whatever kind of well-trodden phrase you want to use. But I go back to what I was saying earlier, in that at the start of the pandemic, you probably wrote a letter to all of your customers and suppliers to reassure them. But have you done anything since? Have you wrote to them in the last month or so to say, you know, we've been through it, here's where we're at, this is, now we've changed and we've adapted, this is what we're doing differently, this is what we're looking forward to now. I think initially everyone's knee-jerk reaction was to say, yeah, we're okay, but I think it needs to be constant communication. That kind of reassurance and letting people know. I mean, getting a letter from CEO of a company is great, but you know, we're still in difficult times. So why not put another out to reassure your partners and suppliers and customers that things have changed, that how you've adapted. But I think it's not just that; it's also your employees as well. We've all gone through the change of working from home. So be more social with your employees, encourage more Zoom calls or phone calls, as many of us are, you know, in the home offices or working from home. So I think we really need to, internally and externally, show our personality and what it is that we're doing in terms of our brands and our businesses. And this is where staff retention will come into play, and you'll start to foster those real relationships with your customers, which ultimately, that's what a lot of us are trying to do. And best of all, with inbound PR, you can measure the absolute crap out of it. Now, these are just some examples. You know, you could go into a deeper dive into each one of these. But for us, with inbound PR and with our campaigns, it's so important to have Google Analytics and your integrated correctly and your website set up properly. Now, obviously, we use HubSpot as our weapon of choice for a lot of our campaigns, but our customers don't always use HubSpot. They have their own versions of analytics, and I don't, you know, you not necessarily have to be married to HubSpot. What you have to make sure is that your analytics is accurately measuring your website impacts and where all the different things that are coming from. So speak to your website before starting an inbound PR campaign. Speak to your website manager or whoever's doing the analytics within your business, and draw a line in the sand and find out where your starting point is. Once you've got that, get your goals and objectives agreed, not just with your own comms team, but you have to get senior leadership sign off. The thing where we've seen failures is that we all agree what good looks like, and everyone charges ahead, campaign's going great, nobody communicates that to the people at the top, and then things change, objectives, priorities change, and things ultimately come under scrutiny because when the internal communication has fallen down. So it's very, very important that you get all of your senior leadership team on board. And as John has mentioned earlier, you need to ditch some of the vanity metrics, followers, impressions for the like on social media, for example, or advertising value equivalents. They measure outputs, not outcomes. And what we're looking to do is measure outcomes. So, you know, the change that we've seen within the industry over the last 10 years is that move to online. And there is a question as to whether, you know, which is more valuable, an article in the Times or, you know, an article in a trade magazine. Well, the answer to that is, well, what are your goals? What are you measuring it by? What inbound PR does is it allows us to measure the impact on the website and use that content and reuse that content on lots of different channels, which then ultimately drives impact, which can be measured towards the bottom line, which is a real massive thing for us, being able to connect those dots over the journey of a buyer right from the start of how they arrive to your website, which, you know, is nothing new. But if they're arriving to your website from an article that you have placed in a magazine or a publication, which has a link which was included in your media outreach, which then drives it back to a landing page which you're promoting, all of a sudden these things are not seen as two separate entities anymore. You don't have inbound PR over here and inbound marketing over here. It's fully integrated as one whole discipline, and that's where our campaigns have been most successful. And, you know, you might just think that we're just obviously pushing and you know, we don't really have any real evidence. That's not true. We have case studies on our website, and if you don't believe us, I encourage you to go and have a look at those, where we have measured the impact of a campaign over 12 months and proven the statistics. So go and have a read of those. So I think for the most part, that is it. Now, I forgot to mention at the very top, and forgive me, that we are running questions as well and taking questions, and we've been monitoring the chat. But I guess one of the questions that we usually get asked, I'm just going to preempt one here, is inbound PR any different from digital PR or traditional PR? So I'm going to put you on the spot here, John, and throw that one to you, and see. I'm interested to hear your answer to that.
Yeah, I think obviously we discussed, so there has been a big shift towards kind of more digital PR, obviously moving with kind of times, I think, from the more kind of traditional ones. So obviously decades ago, the thing was to get it in the paper. You'd cut it out and you'd stick it on a little kind of format, and you send it to the client and think, yeah, well done. Obviously now more towards digital. We have these kind of tools, digital tools, where we're able to actually track, the amount of people, for example, that clicks from a media publication to the website, and where they go from there. What kind of person are they? Obviously, with the kind of PR program, what the first thing we do is kind of identify that kind of buyer persona, that target audience. So we know that this is going to be a story or news of interest to them. That businesses and the services and the products they provide are going to be of interest to them as well. So it's really interesting to have those kind of tools to see where those people go from there. In terms of inbound PR, I think it kind of takes digital PR a step further to kind of integrate it into that kind of PESO model. Again, as we were saying, I think often PR kind of sits in the corner of the office, and people say, oh, who are they? Oh, that's a PR team. I'll leave them to it. I think we're trying to now to get them and us ingrained into the whole kind of marketing and the sales team, using the kind of content and the kind of campaigns and the programs that we run, helped with stuff like inbound PR and the PESO model. So yes, I think it is very, very different, but a lot for the better. Again, there's been a lot of change, I think, inbound PR during a kind of COVID and after the effects of it can only be a good thing.
Good. Well, thank you, John. I think we're close to time. I'm just sorry. I've just one last question has just come in. So, are you seeing an increase in the use of HubSpot analytics tools in the past few months? Short answer to that is yes. We've seen more of an well, is it yes? No, I guess no and yes. So yes, and to the point, because HubSpot have obviously updated their analytics tools recently, so it's giving you more insight into what it is that your website is doing. But ultimately, what we do, and what we've found the best way to measure a campaign is, you've got your website set up in HubSpot. We complement that with what's coming out of Google as well. Because the best way that Google and HubSpot only tell you certain parts of the picture. So if HubSpot's telling you, your performance of your content, that's really, HubSpot is perfect for doing that, and also with your social channels. What we find is Google is actually good at telling you where your traffic is coming from and drilling down into those elements, so you can really understand the impact of the referral websites, because we find that to be a little bit more on point. So I would say the increase in HubSpot tools, we've not seen an increase per se, just a more depth of detail available through the analytical tools. But I think, like I said earlier, it doesn't particularly matter whether you use HubSpot or not. What it matters is that you have your website set up correctly in order to measure movement, downloads and interactions, and also your social channels. Now, if you set those campaigns up correctly within whatever tool, and again, HubSpot's really good at setting up your campaigns, then you can track those, improve those. But rather than measuring the campaign and sending it like that, again, what we've found is hard leads. So how many of your how many new contacts are you generating on a quarter by quarter basis is how we will determine success. And where do those come from? And how much of those are coming from our social channels? Now, obviously, we have small impact on social channel could be all kinds of content. So that's where setting your campaigns for your PR content and how much is coming through to your website from that. Along with what we tend to do is put a piece of our own content at the very core we're doing. So that's also very useful. I'm really pushed for time. Sorry, but I just wanted to mention that we are running a competition. So if you like to key takeaway, please post it on LinkedIn with the hashtag Grow20, and we'll pick a winner at random. So please, if you like to end the session, share and promote it. You can be as happy. Previous 2 winners from the last 2 years, and we also further sessions coming up later in the day or coming up next. Our first one is with Rolly and Olivia from HubSpot. And second is Darren, who's our Chief Strategy Officer, and Andre as well. So 2 good sessions. There should be some links in the chat function in order to attend those, or check your emails as well. And it just remains to say thank you to everyone who's attended. Thank you, John, and we'll hopefully be in touch with some of you soon.
Thank you all. Thanks, guys.